Snow sweeps across the Wyoming plains. At the edge of a frozen valley, a half-collapsed cabin groans under winter's weight. Inside, a young widow with bleeding hands refuses to let her husband's dream die. Most men would ride past. One does not. He is Ethan Walker, a man who vanished into the mountains after losing everything. Former Navy SEAL, broken husband, grieving father. And today he faces a choice that will pull him back into the world he escaped. Because behind polite smiles in a nearby town waits a plan, a legal trap designed to steal a widow's land before winter finishes the job. 3 days, no mercy, no witnesses, just fear disguised as paperwork. But snow has a way of revealing tracks, and sometimes God sends help disguised as a stranger with a hammer. What happens next will restore faith in quiet miracles, second chances, and the power of choosing not to walk away. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no one should face loss or injustice alone, subscribe now, because tomorrow I have something even more powerful waiting for you. The first snowflakes fell almost gently, as if the sky were only testing their resolve. They drifted down in lazy spirals, catching the last light of dusk, dissolving the moment they touched wood or earth. Ethan noticed them immediately. Years in the mountains had taught him to read weather the way other men read faces. Snow rarely announced itself honestly. When it began this soft, this early, it usually meant something worse was gathering behind it. Anna drove the nail home with a solid, satisfying strike. The sound echoed sharper now, swallowed by the widening hush that always came before heavy snow. She exhaled through her teeth, rolled her shoulders, and set the hammer down for a moment, flexing her fingers. Up close, Ethan could see how badly her hands were torn. Skin split at the knuckles, blisters ruptured and raw, swelling already setting in. She hid the pain poorly, but she did not complain. "You've done this before," Ethan said quietly, more observation than question. Anna gave a short, humorless breath that might have been a laugh. Not well, not alone, but yes. She wiped her hands on her skirt, leaving faint rust-colored stains. "My husband started this place. I finished what I could." There it was, the missing shape he'd felt but not named. Her name, he learned then, was Anna. She was 28, though hardship had thinned her face and sharpened her cheekbones enough to make her seem older at first glance. She stood a little under average height, her build slight but wiry, the kind of strength that came from necessity rather than choice. Her hair, honey blonde with darker roots, was thick and stubborn, strands slipping loose no matter how tightly she braided it. Her eyes were gray-green, watchful, and intelligent, with a flicker of dry wit that had not yet been beaten out of her. Anna Crawford was a widow. She did not say it outright. She did not need to. The way she spoke of the cabin told Ethan everything. The way she touched the beam after it was set, almost reverently. The way her voice tightened just a fraction when she said, "My husband started this place." Snow thickened while they worked. Ethan repositioned the brace, checking the angle, then nodded for her to continue. They fell into a rhythm that required no explanation. She hammered, he held. When her arms trembled, he took the hammer without comment and drove the nails himself, returning it when she steadied. They moved around each other with the careful awareness of strangers who understood that space, like trust, had to be earned. The snow was no longer testing. It came harder now, flakes fat and heavy, blowing sideways on a wind that cut through the wool and skin alike. The temperature dropped fast, breath turning visible, the world narrowing to the cabin, the tools, and the small circle of work light left by the dying day. Ethan glanced at the roof. The sag worried him. He climbed onto the remaining wall supports with practiced ease, boots, finding purchase where none seemed obvious, and began securing what he could. Extra planks, cross-bracing, anything to keep the structure from giving way under the accumulating weight. Snow gathered on his shoulders and beard, melting just enough to soak through, then freezing again. "Anna," he said over the rising wind, "we won't finish this properly tonight." She looked up at him, snow crusting her lashes, jaw set. "Then we make it good enough." That answer told him more about her than anything else she could have said. Good enough to survive, good enough to stand, good enough to keep going. The snowstorm closed in like a living thing. Visibility dropped to a handful of yards. The plains vanished entirely, erased by white. Sound dulled, wrapped in thick cotton silence broken only by the scrape of wood. the thud of hammer blows, and the low, constant moan of wind. When Ethan finally dropped back down, his hands were numb, his shoulders aching in a way he welcomed. It meant he was present, useful, alive in a way he hadn't been for years. "That'll hold," he said, "for tonight." Anna nodded once, trusting him without ceremony. "Then let's get inside before it decides otherwise." They stumbled through the narrow doorway together, dragging tools and loose boards in after them. Ethan braced the door as Anna slid a crude wooden bar into place. The cabin groaned as wind pressed against it, snow piling along the walls, testing every seam and weakness. Inside, the space was small but orderly. A bedroll in one corner, a rough-hewn trunk at its foot, a narrow table cobbled together from scrap boards and stumps. A stone hearth held a modest fire, recently repaired, its warmth already fighting back the cold. Everything smelled faintly of smoke, sap, and damp wool. Anna sank onto the trunk, shoulders slumping now that she no longer had to hold herself upright. The adrenaline bled out of her all at once. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, and then just as suddenly pressed her bandaged hands to her face. "I thought," her voice broke. She tried again. "I thought it was going to come down. All of it." Ethan stood there, uncertain. 15 years of isolation had not prepared him for this moment. He had learned how to extract men from danger, how to stabilize wounds, how to survive under fire. He had not learned how to stand beside grief without trying to fix it. Anna's shoulders shook. The laughter dissolved into sobs that tore out of her chest like something ripped loose. Slowly, awkwardly, Ethan crossed the small space between them and placed a hand on her shoulder. He did not squeeze. He did not speak. He simply stayed. Anna's fingers closed around his wrist, gripping hard, as though anchoring herself to something solid while the storm tried to erase the world outside. They stayed like that while snow hammered the roof and the cabin creaked, but did not fail. At some point, the fire settled into a steady burn. The wind eased just enough to be background noise rather than threat. Anna's breathing slowed. "I didn't thank you," she said quietly, finally lowering her hands. Her eyes were red, her face blotched, but there was no embarrassment in her expression. "For stopping. Most men wouldn't have." Ethan shrugged, a small movement. "Most men didn't." She studied him for a long moment, as if filing the truth of him away for later. "You didn't have to stay." "I know." "Why did you?" The question landed heavier than she intended. Ethan looked toward the fire, watching sparks climb and vanish. For a heartbeat, he saw Sarah again. Dark hair, dirt-streaked hands, that quiet, stubborn smile. He swallowed. "Because leaving would have been easier," he said at last. "And I've had enough of easy." Anna nodded as if that answer made a strange, painful kind of sense. Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and indifferent. Inside the half-repaired cabin, two people who had been alone for too long shared warmth, silence, and the unspoken understanding that neither of them would be the same when morning came. And Ethan Walker realized something that unsettled him more than the storm ever could. He was no longer thinking about leaving. The first snowflakes fell almost gently, as if the sky were only testing their resolve. They drifted down in lazy spirals, catching the last light of dusk, dissolving the moment they touched wood or earth. Ethan noticed them immediately. Years in the mountains had taught him to read weather the way other men read faces. Snow rarely announced itself honestly. When it began this soft, this early, it usually meant something worse was gathering behind it. Anna drove the nail home with a solid, satisfying strike. The sound echoed sharper now, swallowed by the widening hush that always came before heavy snow. She exhaled through her teeth, rolled her shoulders, and set the hammer down for a moment, flexing her fingers. Up close, Ethan could see how badly her hands were torn. Skin split at the knuckles, blisters ruptured and raw, swelling already setting in. She hid the pain poorly, but she did not complain. "You've done this before," Ethan said quietly, more observation than question. Anna gave a short, humorless breath that might have been a laugh. "Not well, not alone, but yes." She wiped her hands on her skirt, leaving faint rust-colored stains. "My husband started this place. I finished what I could." There it was, the missing shape he'd felt but not named. Her name, he learned then, was Anna. She was 28, though hardship had thinned her face and sharpened her cheekbones enough to make her seem older at first glance. She stood a little under average height, her build slight but wiry, the kind of strength that came from necessity rather than choice. Her hair, honey blonde with darker roots, was thick and stubborn, strands slipping loose no matter how tightly she braided it. Her eyes were gray-green, watchful, and intelligent, with a flicker of dry wit that had not yet been beaten out of her. Anna Crawford was a widow. She did not say it outright. She did not need to. The way she spoke of the cabin told Ethan everything. The way she touched the beam after it was set, almost reverently. The way her voice tightened just a fraction when she said, "My husband started this place." Snow thickened while they worked. Ethan repositioned the brace, checking the angle, then nodded for her to continue. They fell into a rhythm that required no explanation. She hammered, he held. When her arms trembled, he took the hammer without comment and drove the nails himself, returning it when she steadied. They moved around each other with the careful awareness of strangers who understood that space, like trust, had to be earned. The snow was no longer testing. It came harder now, flakes fat and heavy, blowing sideways on a wind that cut through the wool and skin alike. The temperature dropped fast, breath turning visible, the world narrowing to the cabin, the tools, and the small circle of work light left by the dying day. Ethan glanced at the roof. The sag worried him. He climbed onto the remaining wall supports with practiced ease, boots, finding purchase where none seemed obvious, and began securing what he could. Extra planks, cross-bracing, anything to keep the structure from giving way under the accumulating weight. Snow gathered on his shoulders and beard, melting just enough to soak through, then freezing again. "Anna," he said over the rising wind, "we won't finish this properly tonight." She looked up at him, snow crusting her lashes, jaw set. "Then we make it good enough." That answer told him more about her than anything else she could have said. Good enough to survive, good enough to stand, good enough to keep going. The snowstorm closed in like a living thing. Visibility dropped to a handful of yards. The plains vanished entirely, erased by white. Sound dulled, wrapped in thick cotton silence, broken only by the scrape of wood, the thud of hammer blows, and the low constant moan of wind. When Ethan finally dropped back down, his hands were numb, his shoulders aching in a way he welcomed. It meant he was present, useful, alive in a way he hadn't been for years. "That'll hold," he said, "for tonight." Anna nodded once, trusting him without ceremony. "Then let's get inside before it decides otherwise." They stumbled through the narrow doorway together, dragging tools and loose boards in after them. Ethan braced the door as Anna slid a crude wooden bar into place. The cabin groaned as wind pressed against it, snow piling along the walls, testing every seam and weakness. Inside, the space was small but orderly. A bedroll in one corner, a rough-hewn trunk at its foot, a narrow table cobbled together from scrap boards and stumps. A stone hearth held a modest fire, recently repaired, its warmth already fighting back the cold. Everything smelled faintly of smoke, sap, and damp wool. Anna sank onto the trunk, shoulders slumping now that she no longer had to hold herself upright. The adrenaline bled out of her all at once. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, and then just as suddenly pressed her bandaged hands to her face. "I thought," her voice broke. She tried again. "I thought it was going to come down. All of it." Ethan stood there, uncertain. 15 years of isolation had not prepared him for this moment. He had learned how to extract men from danger, how to stabilize wounds, how to survive under fire. He had not learned how to stand beside grief without trying to fix it. Anna's shoulders shook. The laughter dissolved into sobs that tore out of her chest like something ripped loose. Slowly, awkwardly, Ethan crossed the small space between them and placed a hand on her shoulder. He did not squeeze. He did not speak. He simply stayed. Anna's fingers closed around his wrist, gripping hard, as though anchoring herself to something solid while the storm tried to erase the world outside. They stayed like that while snow hammered the roof and the cabin creaked, but did not fail. At some point, the fire settled into a steady burn. The wind eased just enough to be background noise rather than threat. Anna's breathing slowed. "I didn't thank you," she said quietly, finally lowering her hands. Her eyes were red, her face blotched, but there was no embarrassment in her expression. "For stopping. Most men wouldn't have." Ethan shrugged, a small movement. "Most men didn't." She studied him for a long moment, as if filing the truth of him away for later. "You didn't have to stay." "I know." "Why did you?" The question landed heavier than she intended. Ethan looked toward the fire, watching sparks climb and vanish. For a heartbeat, he saw Sarah again. Dark hair, dirt-streaked hands, that quiet, stubborn smile. He swallowed. "Because leaving would have been easier," he said at last. "And I've had enough of easy." Anna nodded as if that answer made a strange, painful kind of sense. Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and indifferent. Inside the half-repaired cabin, two people who had been alone for too long shared warmth, silence, and the unspoken understanding that neither of them would be the same when morning came. And Ethan Walker realized something that unsettled him more than the storm ever could. He was no longer thinking about leaving. Morning came quietly, as if the storm were ashamed of what it had tried to do in the night. Ethan woke before the light fully settled, the way he always did, his body tuned to cold and danger, even when neither was immediately present. The fire in the hearth had burned down to a low, steady glow. Ashes breathed faint warmth into the room. Outside, the wind had dropped to a whisper, and snow lay heavy and undisturbed against the cabin walls, smoothing the world into something deceptively calm. For a moment, he didn't move. He lay on his bedroll near the door, listening. Not for sound, but for absence. No cracking timbers, no tearing wind, no collapse. The cabin had held. Good enough, he thought again. Sometimes that was everything. He sat up slowly, joints stiff from cold and yesterday's work, and pulled on his boots. Anna slept on the bedroll across the room, curled on her side, one arm tucked beneath her head. Her other hand wrapped in clean cloth that hadn't been there the night before. In sleep, the tension had drained from her face. She looked younger like this, almost sift, though the lines of hardship hadn't disappeared entirely. Snowlight filtered through gaps in the boards, catching the pale strands of her hair where they'd slipped free again. Ethan rose without waking her and eased the door open. Cold flooded in at once, sharp, clean, unforgiving. Snow blanketed everything, knee-deep in places where the wind had drifted it. The plains were gone, erased into a white horizon that met the sky without distinction. His breath clouded instantly. Dust stood where he'd left her, hobbled and patient. Her coat dusted white, steam lifting from her nostrils. Ethan crossed to her, checking her legs, her hooves, the tack. She leaned into his touch, solid and alive, and he felt an irrational wash of relief at the simple fact of her being all right. The cabin roof sagged, but had not given way. Snow weighed it down like a held breath. Ethan studied the structure with a professional eye, tracing stress points, imagining what the next storm might do. The main support beam worried him. It wasn't failure yet, but it was coming, maybe days, maybe weeks, definitely before deep winter. Behind him, the door creaked softly. Anna stepped out into the morning, wrapped in a thick wool shawl, boots pulled on hastily. The cold hit her, and she winced, then squared her shoulders. Her hands were freshly bandaged, cloth clean but already darkening where blood seeped through. "You're still here," she said. It wasn't accusation or surprise alone. It was something closer to relief, carefully disguised. "For now," Ethan replied. He nodded toward the roof. "Snow did us a favor, showed us where it's weakest." She followed his gaze, jaw tightening. "I was afraid of that." Ethan gathered fallen branches from near the tree line, splitting what he could with practiced efficiency. Anna watched for a moment, then went inside and returned with a tin kettle and 2 mismatched cups. The smell of coffee drifted out soon after, thin but unmistakable. "I don't have much," she said when she handed him a cup, "but it's hot." "That counts," he said, and meant it. They stood side by side just outside the door, steam curling from their cups, snow crunching faintly beneath their boots. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It had softened into something companionable. Anna took a sip, then another, as if anchoring herself. "My husband's name was Thomas," she said, not looking at him. "He was a logger, not careless, just unlucky." Ethan said nothing. He knew better than to rush grief. "He spent 2 years building this place," she continued. "Every board, every stone. Said it would be ours, proof we could make something last." Her mouth twisted slightly. "He finished the roof 3 weeks before the accident." Ethan glanced back at the sagging line of it, imagining a man standing there, proud and tired, and unaware of how quickly things could break. "When he died," Anna said, quieter now, "everyone told me to leave, go back to town, stay with family, be sensible." She shrugged. But this was his dream. Walking away felt like killing it twice. Ethan nodded once. He understood that kind of loyalty, the kind that looked irrational from the outside and necessary from the inside. She finally met his eyes. "What about you?" He hesitated. It would have been easy to deflect, to give her nothing but surface truth. He'd done that for years, but the snow, the night, the way she had trusted him without knowing him, those things pressed against his defenses. "I used to be someone else," he said carefully. "I was good at it. Then I wasn't." Anna waited. "I lost my wife," Ethan continued, "and our child. After that, I didn't see a point in staying where memories could reach me." She absorbed that without flinching. No pity, no platitudes. "That's why you live out there," she said, nodding toward the mountains in the distance, "where nothing asks anything of you." "Yes. And yet," she added softly, "you stopped." Ethan didn't answer right away. The truth was uncomfortable. He had stopped because something in Anna's determination had mirrored a life he'd abandoned, because helping her had reminded him of who he'd been before grief hollowed him out, because maybe, just maybe, running had stopped working. He took another swallow of coffee. "I won't pretend I know what I'm doing here," he said at last, "but that beam won't hold through another snow. I can fix it, properly." Anna's breath caught. "That'll take days. 2, maybe 3. She shook her head at once. "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't," Ethan said. "I'm telling you what I see." Snow slid from the roof in a low, unsettling rush, landing hard against the wall. Anna flinched, then steadied herself. "If you stay," she said slowly, "people will talk. A woman alone with a man." "I don't care," Ethan said. The words surprised them both. Anna searched his face, looking for hesitation, for regret. Finding none, she nodded. "All right, then we do it right." They worked through the late morning, clearing snow, shoring up supports, measuring what timber would need replacing. Their movements grew more fluid, more confident. Trust settled in not as a feeling, but as a habit. By midday, the sky had brightened into a hard, pale blue. The storm had passed, but winter had announced itself. As Ethan drove a temporary brace into place, he felt something unfamiliar settle alongside the ache in his muscles. Purpose, not survival, not escape, purpose. And that unsettled him more than any storm ever could. The work settled into them the way cold did, quietly at first, then all at once. Ethan rose before dawn each day, his body still obeying an old rhythm it had never fully forgotten. The mountains had taught him patience. The teams he once ran with had taught him precision. Here, both mattered. Snow lingered on the ground, crusted and hard in the mornings, softening by afternoon when the sun found enough strength to matter. Each day bought them a narrow window, and Ethan used it carefully. They started with the beam. Up close, it was worse than he'd hoped, and better than he'd feared. The crack ran long but shallow, a slow failure rather than an imminent one. Ethan ran his fingers along it, feeling the weakness the way a medic felt for a fracture beneath skin. "It won't break today," he said, "but it will." Anna stood beside him, hands wrapped, eyes fixed on the wood, as though staring long enough might shame it into holding. "Then we don't let it," she said. He almost smiled. They hauled timber from the edge of the trees, choosing pieces that hadn't twisted under snow weight, cutting and shaping them with hand tools that bit slowly and demanded respect. Anna worked despite her hands, finding ways to brace, to measure, to hold steady while Ethan cut and set. She learned quickly, faster than she thought she would, faster than most. "You're stubborn," Ethan said once, watching her lever a beam into place with her shoulder when she should have asked for help. She snorted. "So, I've been told." By the second afternoon, they moved around each other without thinking. He passed tools without looking. She anticipated where he'd need support, stepping in before he asked. The cabin changed shape under their hands, not dramatically, but steadily, the way real things did. Each board added was a small argument against winter. Between tasks, they spoke in fragments. Anna told him about Thomas in pieces, never all at once. How he whistled while he worked. How he believed stubbornly that land responded to kindness. How he'd planned a second room for later, when they could afford the time. She spoke without tears, as if crying were something she'd already done enough of alone. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't compare, didn't offer lessons carved from grief. He knew better than to cheapen loss by rushing through it. In return, Anna noticed things about him he didn't mean to reveal. The way he flinched, not outwardly, but inwardly, at sudden sharp sounds. How he checked to the horizon without realizing it. how he never turned his back on open space. Once, when a board slipped and struck his forearm, she saw his jaw lock before he even looked down. Pain processed silently, efficiently, as though it were just another problem to be solved. "You've been hurt before," she said quietly. "Yes." Not just once. No. That was all. By the third night, the cabin felt different. Not finished. Far from it, but steadier. The fire burned warmer. The walls complained less when the wind tested them. Snow melted more slowly on the roof, shedding in small, manageable slides instead of threatening avalanches. They ate together by the hearth, simple food stretched carefully. Beans, dried meat, bread Anna had baked earlier in the week and guarded like something precious. The firelight softened her features, catching in her hair, warming the sharpness of her face. "You don't talk much," she said, not unkindly. "I do, when there's a reason." "And now?" Ethan stared into the fire. Sparks lifted and died. "I'm not sure yet." She nodded, accepting that answer, the way she accepted weather, without approval or complaint. That night, after Anna had gone to sleep, Ethan sat awake, his back against the wall, rifle resting nearby more out of habit than fear. The cabin creaked softly, settling into its reinforced bones. Outside, the stars were sharp and cold, scattered like broken glass across the sky. He thought of Sarah, not as pain this time, not as the sudden sharp absence that usually cut him open, but as memory, with edges worn smooth by use. He remembered her hands, dirt under the nails, her voice when she read aloud on winter nights, insisting on finishing one more chapter, even when the fire burned low. He remembered how she'd looked at him when he tried to pull away from the world, how she'd held his face and told him, gently, that hiding wasn't the same as healing. He hadn't believed her then. Maybe that was why he was here now. The next morning brought clear sky and a brittle cold that bit through wool. Ethan climbed onto the roof to finish securing the last of the reinforcement. From up there, he could see the long sweep of the plains, endless and indifferent. He'd lived his life like that landscape for years, wide, empty, unreachable. Below him, Anna steadied the ladder, gloved hands firm. She looked up once, eyes squinting against the glare. "Careful, I am," he said automatically. But the word felt different now, less like caution, more like a habit. Ethan finished securing the last brace and climbed down from the roof, boots thudding softly into packed snow. He stepped back, studying the cabin one final time. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was stronger than it had been when he first saw it, strong enough to stand against the next storm, strong enough to buy time. Anna followed his gaze, arms folded tight against the cold. "So," she said, carefully casual, "will it hold?" "It'll hold," Ethan answered, "but winter doesn't negotiate. You're going to need more than what you have here." She exhaled slowly, already knowing what he meant. "Supplies, food, salt, nails, lamp oil, coffee." He paused. "Maybe canvas, and medicine, if you can get it." Anna's mouth curved into a faint, tired smile. "You make it sound like a campaign." "Winter is one," he said. They stood in silence for a moment, the decision forming between them without being spoken. The land around the cabin lay quiet under snow, beautiful and unforgiving. Ethan had lived long enough out here to know when preparation stopped being optional. "Lodgepole," Anna said at last. 2 days' ride. Yes. She turned to him then, searching his face. "I've gone alone before." "I know." "And yet you're suggesting—" "I am," Ethan said evenly. "You shouldn't go alone. Not this time." Anna considered that. Pride flickered across her expression, then settled into something steadier. Judgment, not fear. Finally, she nodded once. "All right, we'll go together." The words landed heavier than either of them expected. Ethan felt it immediately. Going into town meant people, eyes, questions, a world he had avoided for 15 years. But the thought no longer tightened his chest the way it once had. It felt inevitable. They turned toward the cabin together, already thinking through what to pack, what to leave, what could wait. Behind them, the structure they had rebuilt stood quiet and patient, as if aware that its survival no longer rested on a single pair of hands. And for the first time in a very long while, Ethan Walker found himself riding towards civilization instead of away from it, knowing that whatever waited for him in Lodgepole, he would not be facing it alone. They turned south before noon, angling away from the straight path to Lodgepole. Anna noticed the change in direction, but said nothing. She had learned, over the past few days, that Ethan Walker did not make unnecessary turns. If he chose a different trail, it was because something had called him there. The land began to dip gently after an hour's ride. The wind softened. Snow thinned and broke apart, interrupted by sagebrush and the dark, frozen line of a creek that cut through the earth like an old scar. The light changed as they descended, less harsh, more diffused, as if the sky itself lowered to listen. Ethan slowed dust. "This is where I lived," he said. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an invitation, just a fact, spoken plainly, the way men spoke of things they had carried too long. Anna drew her horse alongside his. She took in the valley with a careful eye, the shelter it offered, the way the land curved inward rather than away, the quiet dignity of a place that had once held a life. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It was," Ethan replied. "Still is. Just different." They rode the last stretch in silence. The cabin stood near the center of the valley, weathered but intact, its outline familiar enough to tighten Ethan's chest. Smaller than Anna's, built not for defense, but for endurance. The roof sagged slightly with age. The walls leaned no more than a degree or two, within tolerance. Someone had used it as shelter over the years, but no one had claimed it. It had been left alone, as if the land itself understood it belonged to a man who might one day return. Ethan stopped at the edge of the clearing. For a long moment, he did not dismount. Memory rose without warning. Sarah standing in the doorway, hair dark and loose around her shoulders, hands dusted with flour. Sarah laughing when the first winter stove smoked out the room because he'd misjudged the draft. Sarah pressing his hand to her belly late one night, eyes bright, saying, "She's kicking, she's strong." He swallowed. Anna dismounted quietly and waited, giving him space without retreating. She had the good sense to understand that some places were crossed in stages. "She planted a garden there," Ethan said at last, lifting his chin toward the south wall. "Said it would get the longest sun." The plot was overgrown now, sage reclaiming the soil, but the shape remained. Order had once lived there. "She was taller than you," he continued, the words coming easier once he allowed them. "Strong. Not loud about it, just capable. She believed if you worked at something long enough, it would eventually tell you the truth." Anna listened. She did not interrupt. They approached the cabin together. The door opened with a familiar complaint. Inside, dust lay thick, undisturbed, except for old boot prints. The pot-bellied stove still stood against the wall. A table he had built from uneven pine rested beneath the window, scarred but solid. Near the hearth sat Sarah's rocking chair, one leg shorter than the others, rocking slightly when the wind found its way through the cracks. "She read to the baby from that chair," Ethan said. His voice tightened, but he did not stop. Out loud, said voices mattered. He crossed to the trunk at the foot of the bed and opened it. The contents had shifted over time, but they were still there. Folded cloth, a shawl worn thin, gloves patched until they were more thread than fabric. At the bottom lay a leather-bound journal. Ethan lifted it carefully. Sarah's handwriting greeted him at once, clean, confident, slanted just enough to feel alive. He did not read the words aloud, but they moved through him all the same. Lists of chores, notes about weather, small hopes written without irony. And then the later pages. "He worries too much," she had written once, "but he'll be a good father, I know it." Ethan closed the journal and held it against his chest. "I left," he said quietly. "Thought if I stayed away long enough, this place would lose its power over me." Anna stepped closer, not touching him, but near enough that he could feel her presence. "Did it?" "No," he exhaled. "But today, it hurts without breaking me." They stood together in the doorway, looking out over the valley. Snow glinted faintly where the sun found it. The land did not accuse him. It did not forgive him either. It simply existed. "I needed to see this," Ethan said. "To remember who I was before I started running." Anna nodded. "And now?" He looked at the cabin one last time, at the garden that still remembered Rose, at the place that had held love and loss without collapsing under either. "Now I know the past can walk with me," he said. "It doesn't have to chase me." They mounted up and turned back toward the trail to Lodgepole. As the valley fell away behind them, Ethan felt something settle. Not closure, not peace, but permission. Permission to keep going. Lodgepole revealed itself slowly, the way things that had once mattered often did. First came the road, packed dirt cut deep with ruts, frozen hard at the edges where snow clung stubbornly to shadow. Then the buildings rose out of the land, low and square, stitched together from timber hauled at great cost and held upright more by stubbornness than design. Smoke lifted from chimneys in thin, gray lines, carrying the smell of coal, pine, and cooked fat. Bells clinked somewhere, a harness, a door, a distant church tower catching the wind. Ethan felt it before he saw it clearly. The weight, not of danger, of memory. He slowed dust as they crested the last low rise. Anna rode beside him, her posture straight, her expression composed, though he could sense the tension beneath it. Towns did that to people like them. People who lived on the edges, who did not fit neatly into categories others understood. Lodgepole was bigger than Ethan remembered, not by much, but enough to matter. New buildings crowded the main street. A proper church now stood near the center, its steeple narrow and ambitious, as if reaching upward could make civilization permanent. Progress had arrived while Ethan had been elsewhere. They rode in without hurry. And the town noticed. Conversation slowed as they passed. Men paused mid-sentence. A woman pulling water from a well straightened and watched them with open curiosity. Someone laughed a little too loudly near the saloon, then fell silent. Eyes followed them, not hostile, not welcoming, assessing. Ethan kept his gaze forward, his posture relaxed but unmistakably alert. Years of training settled over him like a second skin. He was not afraid, but he was aware, very aware. Anna felt it too. She shifted in the saddle, chin lifting a fraction. She had lived here once, long enough to understand how quickly stories formed, and how rarely they died. A woman riding in with a man who was not her husband. After weeks alone on a claim, people would talk. They always did. Let them, she murmured, more to herself than to Ethan. They tied their horses outside the trading post. The sign creaked overhead in the wind, Cluse and Sons, though there were no sons anymore. Ethan dismounted first, then offered Anna his hand. She hesitated only a second before taking it. The gesture was simple, but it was seen. Inside, the trading post was warm and crowded, shelves lined with goods that smelled of oil, leather, and dust. The bell above the door announced them, sharp and unavoidable. Conversations dipped again, then resumed in softer tones. Margaret stood behind the counter. She looked up and froze. Her eyes widened, first with recognition, then with something like disbelief. "Mr. Walker?" Ethan nodded once. "Afternoon. I didn't—" She caught herself, professional instinct reasserting itself. "It's good to see you. We hadn't heard from you in a while." "That was the idea," he said mildly. Margaret smiled. Uncertain, then noticed Anna standing beside him. The smile shifted, softened, turned polite. "And you are?" "Anna Crawford," Anna said evenly. "I need supplies." At the sound of the name, something flickered across Margaret's face. Recognition, sympathy, calculation. "Of course," she said. "I'm sorry about Thomas." "Thank you," Anna replied. "I'm managing." Margaret nodded, already reaching for a ledger. "What will you need?" As Anna listed items, flour, salt, lamp oil, nails, canvas, Ethan moved a few steps away, pretending to browse. In truth, he listened. Near the door, 3 men stood close together, voices low, but not low enough. "That's her, isn't it?" one murmured. "The widow." "And that's Walker with her. Thought he'd gone feral in the mountains. Looks like he's found himself company." The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Ethan's jaw tightened, muscle memory flickering. He turned slightly, just enough that the men caught his eye. The conversation died at once. One of them looked away, another shifted uncomfortably. Anna finished paying and turned to him. She had heard enough. "We're done," she said quietly. Outside, the cold felt cleaner. They loaded the supplies in silence, the tension lingering like frost. Ethan secured the packs with efficient knots, movements economical and precise. Anna watched him for a moment, then spoke. "They'll talk," she said. "They always do." "I know." "You don't have to stay," she added. "Not for this." Ethan looked at her then, really looked, at the set of her shoulders, the steadiness in her eyes, the refusal to be diminished. "I'm not staying because of them," he said. "I'm staying because of you." She absorbed that without drama. "All right." As they mounted up, a man stepped out from the shadow of the saloon across the street. Well dressed for the frontier, clean beard, eyes sharp and curious in a way that made Ethan's instincts stir. The man watched them with open interest, lips curved in something that might have been a smile. Ethan did not know his name, not yet, but he felt, with quiet certainty, that this town, this world he had avoided, was already closing around them, and whatever came next would not be solved by silence alone. They had nearly reached the edge of town when the man crossed the street. He moved with an ease that suggested ownership, of the space, of the moment, perhaps even of the people watching. His coat was clean, tailored better than most frontier wear, the leather gloves on his hands supple and unscarred. He removed his hat as he approached, a courtesy delivered with practiced precision rather than warmth. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, voice smooth as oil over water, "I was hoping we'd meet." Anna reined in at once. Ethan did the same, his posture shifting subtly, weight settling back, awareness sharpening. The street had gone quieter, not silent, towns never truly did, but attentive. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Anna replied. The man smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "Benjamin Hartwell. I handle property matters in and around Lodge Pole." Ethan felt it then. The prickle along his spine, the quiet warning honed by years of reading men who hid danger behind civility. Hartwell's gaze slid to him, assessing, measuring, then returning to Anna as if Ethan were an accessory rather than a presence. "I understand you've returned to your late husband's claim," Hartwell continued. "Brave decision. Not many women choose to do that alone." "I wasn't aware my choices required commentary," Anna said. "Everything requires commentary in a town this size," Hartwell replied lightly, "particularly when debts are involved." The word landed heavy. Ethan's eyes narrowed a fraction. "What debts?" Hartwell turned to him then, really looked at him this time. Recognition flickered. Not personal, but categorical. A man who didn't bluff. A man who wouldn't be easily intimidated. "And you are?" Hartwell asked. "Someone who doesn't like surprises," Ethan said. Hartwell chuckled. "Fair enough." He looked back to Anna. "Your husband, Thomas, incurred certain obligations before his death. Outstanding accounts. Unsettled agreements." Anna's jaw tightened. "Thomas paid what he owed." Hartwell's expression shifted. Sympathy arranged like furniture. "I'm afraid the records suggest otherwise. Matters like these can be complicated, particularly when documentation is lacking." Ethan felt Anna tense beside him. "You're telling me this in the street?" she asked. "I'm offering you an opportunity," Hartwell said. "A civil resolution, before winter makes everything harder than it needs to be." "What kind of resolution?" Ethan asked. Hartwell's eyes flicked to him again, calculating. "The land is valuable, more so than your husband realized. Transferring ownership would settle the debt neatly. You'd walk away clear." Anna stared at him. "This land is my home." Hartwell's smile thinned. "Homes are sentimental things. The law is not." Silence stretched. Ethan could feel the town leaning in, not physically, but in spirit. This was how power worked here. Not with fists, with ledgers and whispers, sorrow and the threat of cold nights without shelter. "You have no claim," Anna said, steady despite the color draining from her face. Hartwell shrugged. "That remains to be seen. I'd advise you to consult whatever papers you have left." He tipped his hat again. "I'll give you 3 days. After that, the matter will proceed formally." 3 days? Ethan repeated. "Generous, considering the season," Hartwell said, already stepping back. "Good day, Mrs. Crawford." "Mr. Walker," Ethan said. Hartwell paused, the name settling into his mind. "Mr. Walker." He walked away without hurry. The street resumed its noise as if a signal had been given. Doors opened, conversations restarted, but the air had changed. Something ugly had been set in motion. Anna exhaled shakily. "He's lying." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but lies work when they sound official." They rode out of town in silence, the supplies heavy on their horses, heavier in their thoughts. Snow clouds gathered low on the horizon, gray and impatient. "I should have kept better records," Anna said at last. "Thomas handled most of it. I trusted him." "That wasn't a mistake," Ethan replied. "Trust is how people are supposed to live, and how they get taken advantage of." "Yes," he agreed. "Also that." They stopped by the creek just outside town to let the horses drink. Ethan dismounted and crouched, hands resting on his knees, mind working. Men like Hartwell didn't bluff without leverage. If he'd spoken publicly, it was because he believed the town and the law were already leaning his way. "What are you thinking?" Anna asked. "That he's done this before," Ethan said, "and that he expects you to fold." "I won't." "I know." He looked up at her. "But refusing isn't enough. You'll need proof, witnesses, paper. And if I don't have it," Ethan stood slowly, "then we find it. Or we make enough noise that someone with authority starts asking questions." Anna studied him. "You speak like someone who's fought this kind of thing." "I have," he said, "in different uniforms." She hesitated. "You don't owe me this." Ethan met her gaze, feeling the familiar tightening in his chest, the old instinct to step back, to disengage, to survive quietly. "I know," he said. "That's not why I am doing it." They mounted up again, turning back toward the cabin. The land stretched wide and indifferent ahead of them, winter pressing closer with every mile. Behind them, Lodgepole stood unchanged, its judgments already forming, its loyalties already chosen. Ethan Walker rode on with a single, undeniable truth settling into place. This time, running would cost more than staying, and he had already decided which price he was willing to pay. They did not speak much on the ride back. The sky had lowered by the time they left Lodgepole behind, clouds thick and bruised with the promise of more snow. The land seemed to contract under it, distances shrinking, sound carrying farther than it should. Ethan rode slightly ahead now, not out of dominance but habit, scanning the terrain, counting angles, reading what most people never noticed. Anna watched him from behind, seeing the change as even if she could not yet name it. This was not the quiet mountain man who had stopped to help her at a broken cabin. This was someone else. When they reached the cabin, the wind had begun to rise again, not a storm yet, but its breath. They unloaded the supplies quickly, hands moving in practiced efficiency. Ethan stacked sacks and crates with deliberate order, already calculating consumption rates, contingencies, margins of error. "You think he's coming back?" Anna said. "Yes." "Soon?" "Yes." She nodded once, accepting it the way she accepted winter, without panic, without denial. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than it had days ago, not because it had changed, but because the world outside had grown teeth. Ethan set the lantern on the table and unrolled a scrap of paper Anna had found among Thomas's things, a rough map of the claim and surrounding parcels. "Tell me everything you remember," Ethan said, "about the land, about who saw Thomas buy it, who helped him, who might speak for you." Anna sat, fingers laced tightly together. "There was a surveyor, once, a man named Keller. He came through 2 summers ago." "Did he mark the boundaries?" "Yes, drove stakes. Thomas paid him in cash and trade." "Anyone else?" "The minister from Lodgepole. He witnessed the agreement, said it wasn't proper paperwork, but it was honest." Ethan nodded. Witnesses mattered. Patterns mattered more. "Anyone else had trouble with Hartwell?" he asked. Anna hesitated. "Martha Jensen, widow north of the creek. She sold last year, said she had no choice." "And before that?" Anna's brow furrowed as she thought. "Ruth Morrison. No relation, I don't think. Same story. Debt, pressure, quick sale." Ethan felt the pieces begin to align. Predators did not invent new methods every time. They refined the old ones. He stood and paced the length of the cabin, boots quiet on the packed earth floor. His mind worked the way it always had before an operation. Strip away emotion, identify leverage, establish timing. "Hartwell isn't improvising," Ethan said. "He's running a system. He counts on isolation, on winter, on shame." "And me being alone," Anna said. "Yes." He met her eyes. "Which you aren't anymore." She studied him. "What are you really?" The question was not accusatory. It was curious, earnest. Ethan considered lying. It would have been easier, safer. "I used to be a Navy SEAL," he said finally. "Before the mountains, before I disappeared." Anna absorbed that in silence. The pieces she'd noticed, the awareness, the discipline, the way he moved, clicked quietly into place. "That kind of life," she said, "doesn't leave you untouched." "No," Ethan agreed. "It leaves you trained and tired." She watched him carefully. "And now? And now someone is trying to take your home using fear and paper," he said. That I understand. Outside, the wind rattled the walls, testing the work they had done. The cabin held. Ethan stopped pacing. Well, Hartwell gave you 3 days. That means he believes he has the advantage. We need to change that. How? We gather witnesses, quietly. We document everything. And if that's not enough, he paused, choosing his words. We force daylight. Anna's breath caught. You mean the law? Yes. And if the law doesn't come in time, Ethan looked at the door, at the rifle resting where it always did. Then we make sure you're not alone when the pressure comes. Anna held his gaze. This is dangerous. So is doing nothing. The wind rose another notch, snow beginning to whisper against the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a tree cracked under its own weight. Anna stood. Then tell me what to do. Ethan felt the final line inside him give way, the last excuse, the last retreat. Tomorrow, he said, we start with Martha Jensen. And after that? After that, Ethan replied, voice calm and certain. Hartwell learns that winter cuts both ways. They stood there together as the cabin creaked and settled around them, two people no longer waiting for the world to decide their fate. Outside, the storm gathered itself, and for the first time in years, Ethan Walker did not brace to endure it. He prepared to meet it head-on. When we look back on the journey of Ethan and Anna, we may begin to understand something simple and profound. Miracles rarely arrive in the way we expect them to. They do not always come as thunder from the heavens or sudden changes that fix everything at once. More often, a miracle arrives quietly, in the form of a person who chooses to stop, who chooses not to turn away, who sets down the weight of their own pain long enough to help someone else carry theirs. Perhaps this is how God moves in the world, not always with a voice we can hear, but by placing compassion into human hearts, courage into those who feel emptied by loss, and hope into places that seem long abandoned. Ethan was not saved because he was stronger than others. Anna was not protected because she deserved more than anyone else. They were brought together because, at the right moment, God allowed two broken paths to cross, so healing could begin. And maybe, as you listen to this story today, you find yourself in the middle of your own winter. Perhaps you are facing loneliness, grief, uncertainty, or fear. Perhaps you feel as though the world has narrowed and the way forward is unclear. If that is you, remember this: God has never taken his eyes off you. The answer may not come immediately, but God may already be preparing a meeting, a moment, or a person that will change the direction of your life, just enough to help you keep going. And sometimes, you are the miracle God sends into someone else's life. If this story spoke to your heart, please share it with someone who may need to be reminded that they are not alone. Leave a comment and tell me where you are in your own journey. And subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow I will bring you another story about hope, faith, and the quiet miracles still unfolding around us. May God bless you, may He protect your family, may He comfort those who are weary, and may He restore hope to every heart listening today. Amen.